Good afternoon, good evening, welcome, good morning. Welcome to our webinar today on driving efficiency in microlending. We'll just give it a few seconds for everyone to enter the room. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, maybe to some of you already. Welcome, good afternoon, good morning, good evening. Welcome to our webinar on driving efficiency in microlending today. We give it a few seconds for everyone to enter. We've got over 70 registered participants who will join us today. So welcome, good afternoon, good morning, and a warm welcome to our webinar today on driving efficiency in microlending. Today's event is sponsored by Triple Jump Advisory Services, who make these wonderful events possible and have done so for over a year now. The event is delivered to you by Inspiring Development. We are a management services provider and MSME banking consultant. My name is Carmen Geil, and I am your moderator for today. Our webinar today will last 1 hour and 45 minutes. The first hour and 15 minutes are entirely dedicated to presentations by our wonderful presenters today. The last 30 minutes are entirely dedicated to these presenters answering the questions that have arisen throughout from you. Please ask questions throughout. You can do this by using the Q&A function in the bottom of your screen, in the bottom panel. If you're on a mobile device, you touch once and it might be the 3 dots, but there's a Q&A function where you can at any time type your question already, either anonymously or stating your name as well. And we'll get to all the questions in this last session at the end. So please ask your questions as they arise. We will make sure that we will get to them. We have over half an hour dedicated to answering all the questions around this topic. We are recording today's webinar, and the link to the recording will be made available to you within 48 hours from today's event, where you can download the recording and also the presentation that we are using today. Upon leaving the webinar, in case you dropped out, you will be sent a little window asking you to fill in a survey. As for Triple Jump Advisory Services and for us at Inspiring Development, it is very, very useful if you fill in that information. There is a bit of questions about today, what you thought about today, and also, almost more importantly, also about the topics you would like to talk about in the future. What themes are of interest to you? And if you fill that in, we will then work on the next topics we will bring to you. So please take a few minutes for the survey. It's only 7 questions, so very, very short. Now, as you probably are as well, we are curious who is here with us today. So we'd like to start with a little Menti poll, because we will use this tool, as you probably know very well, throughout our call today. So please go from any device, from your laptop, from your mobile, anywhere, to menti.com. And when you enter the code of today's meeting, 64527306, like shown on screen, you will now already be asked the first question. And we're curious where you are phoning in from today. So please just type in the country where you are right now. Where are you calling from today? Type it in, and then it will appear on screen. So when you go to the website, somehow, menti.com, using a device, a laptop, a phone, anything really, and what you type will appear on screen. Our presenters will also have some questions, because it is very interesting to share some information. How are things going already with other institutions? And here we are. Some of you are joining us from Georgia, Myanmar, Sri Lanka, Cambodia. Welcome to all of you coming from different countries and joining us for this event today. From Bosnia and Herzegovina, welcome to this event. So the page is menti.com. The code for today's meeting, 64527306, is unique. And please know also that we have no way of knowing who answers what. So all your answers are entirely confidential. Like here, we will simply see the main results from the group, no individual results. So everything you share today is confidential, So don't worry, we will keep that safe. Welcome to everyone also from the UK, Albania, Sri Lanka, Indonesia, Lebanon. Welcome to our meeting for today. Also Cambodia, welcome. Also of interest is we make it up as well for you to know a little bit, well, is this people from banks or microfinance institutions? So please also help us already with the next question, because practice makes the master. My institution is a deposit-taking microfinance institution, a microfinance institution, a bank, or another kind of institution, such as an investor, Blue Orchard maybe, and choose that one. Thank you very much for your answer. We have a great majority of microfinance institutions with us today. Wow, that is a large majority, and just one bank and no other institutions. Wonderful. Thank you very much for participating. So keep this website open. However you access, keep it open, because our presenters will come back to Menti and ask you a few questions on the topic in a little while. Actually, fairly early on in the presentation already. Now, it's time for me to introduce you to your presenters. We have with us today Asmus Rothne, Manager for Banking and Banking for MSMEs in Inspiring Development. Asmus has many years of experience in MSME banking up to executive level. He has a very strategic vision of the development of MSME banks, microfinance as such, and as well in credit risk and lending and process design. He's joined by Katie Bourdouly, my colleague who is a senior banker as well, who is a specialist and has worked a long time in business development, credit risk, arrears management, all around the business development side of things and operations. She also has executive experience and especially on a COO level. So the combination for today shall be very interesting in terms of driving efficiency in microlending from these two. We'll start with an introduction, setting the scene, market development challenges for MFIs that you are right in the middle of right now already, factors accelerating the process of changing the approach to microfinance. Then we move into methods for improving the efficiency in microfinance. And here we're getting rather specific. Where exactly can you do? And also considering the context that most of us find ourselves in. And then we stop with a short summary before we move into the Q&A session. Now today, Asmus will start with the first part, market development challenges for MFIs. And I invite him to come on screen now. I will leave you in his very capable hands.
Great. Thank you very much, Carmen. Hello, everybody. I'm Asmus. Together with my colleague Katie, we'll be working through these topics with you in today's webinar. The first big question is, what is efficiency? How do we measure efficiency? There are different ways of doing this. And I would say the first side of it, or one side of it, is the financial side. So there are financial indicators like return on equity, cost-income ratio, or sometimes in microfinance, something like self-sustainability ratio, are calculated at the level of the whole institution. They give us one indication of whether we are efficient, but they don't tell the whole story. We might look financially efficient because we have very nice results on have very high interest rates, etc. But there is another side to this, which is the operational side. And here, one of the ratios that's most common in microfinance institution is, of course, loans per loan officer. And here I would like to invite you to go back to the Menti page that we had before. And here, what is the efficiency approximately in your institution as measured in the average number of clients in the portfolio per microloan officer in your institution? We have the categories up to 100, 100 to 200, 2 to 300, or more than 300 clients on average per loan officer. We'll just wait a moment for everybody to get a chance. It already seems like everyone is clustering in 2 to 300 clients. Okay, so it looks like that's the most common. Nobody has up less than 100 clients per loan officer. I wouldn't also expect that, because that would be very low efficiency. 200 to 300 is also what we, for a traditional microfinance institution, consider a pretty good level of efficiency, and more than 300 is already really good. It's something you can achieve with good processes, etc. And it's something we will talk about more during this seminar. The other thing I want to bring up is that this indicator, although it's today the most common, it might not be the best one for the future, because some of the tools, the concepts, the ideas we will introduce in this webinar will point in the direction of a future where we might not, at least not for all clients, have the same relationship of one loan officer who has one portfolio and manages a certain number of clients. Some clients might have a different kind of relationship. So in the future, we will also have to look for different indicators for how to measure this efficiency. Maybe we have to start talking about the volume or number of loans in our portfolio in relation to the total number of employees, for example, or in relation to some other indicator. But that's not the key topic for today. The key topic for today is the ideas and concepts that we can use for driving up efficiency in your institution. Before we get to the very concrete ones, Carmen, if we could go back to the presentation, please. Before we go to the very concrete ideas, I want to take a little step back and look at market structure and the trends that have been happening in the industry. So next slide, please. Microfinance started with microfinance institutions. So it started with a very empty market, actually, and microfinance institutions created this market at a time where, in almost all cases, commercial banks were not willing to go into microfinance. They considered it not profitable for them, because they had their cost structure, and each ticket size was so small in microfinance that they thought they couldn't make it profitably. Also, they did not have the technology to really understand in this rather informal sector which are the creditworthy clients. So it started with microfinance, dedicated microfinance institutions moving in all across the micro range, some of them very successfully so, also financially very successfully so. The next step was that the banks woke up to this. They saw the good results created in the microfinance sector, and some banks started moving in. Typically, they moved in the upper end of microfinance. We rarely saw banks going into group lending or $20 loans or something like that. They usually went for the ones that were at least several $1,000s. That's why we placed them here in the upper end. What we're seeing today is another wave. That is the wave of fintech companies coming into the market with new technologies that allow them to lend profitably in the lower micro segment. So that creates a new level of competition for microfinance institutions. We now get squeezed from above, from the banks, and from below, from the fintech institutions. This increased competition puts a lot of pressure on us. And what we want to talk about today is how we can react to this pressure. So let's go on and look at how does this, in which way does this competition pressure actually affect us? So we have pressure on our margins, on the credit margins. Why do we have that? Well, interest rates are in most cases going down. We don't have the very high interest rates that we saw 10, 20 years ago. That's great for the client, but it's not always good for the microfinance institution, because it puts pressure on the financial side. Then we have credit risk. Credit risk is also coming under pressure. One big reason is simply that the market gets much more saturated. When it's a market with low penetration and people don't have a lot of loans, there's a better chance of getting your loan repaid. Once everyone has very high loan exposures, some people start having more problems, and that is felt in the cost of risk that you see in your institution. And the third problem that affects our margins is the operational costs. Operational costs in microfinance institutions have been stubbornly high. It's been very difficult to bring down the operational costs because the operational model that we have traditionally assumed certain fixed costs that were difficult to tinker with, and we'll get back to that. If we look at the environment side, what kind of pressure do we see from the environment? Competition, we already talked about on the previous slide. We have, in addition to competition, we see the crisis today. We have the COVID-19 crisis, which put a lot of new problems in terms of operations. How can we manage to meet with our clients without getting sick, to work together with our employees without getting sick? So this kind of operational pressure many microfinance institutions felt and are still feeling. Could you advance the presentation, please? Then we have clients. Clients are getting more picky, I would say. Where maybe 20 years ago, people were very, very happy and grateful for the opportunity to receive a microloan. We see today that clients have much more expectations and demands. They want to get it in a convenient way with good conditions, good service, etc. And that is an additional layer of pressure for the microfinance institution that we need to respond to. And the final one is the HR side. Again, years ago, it was considered a very nice job to be a loan officer in most markets. Well paid, attractive, interesting career perspectives. In a lot of markets, it's not seen that way anymore. And it's getting more difficult to get people with actually the pretty strong qualifications that you need to be a good loan officer. You need to have both good people skills, sales skills, analytical skills, understand accounting, mathematics, etc. So it's a complex skill set. It's a hard job, and it's getting more difficult to recruit good people for this. All of these things taken together is sort of what is pushing us today that we need to change in order to be sustainable for the future. So that's on the one side, we're getting pushed, but on the other side, there are also things that maybe help us to change. During this, sorry, just a second. During this COVID-19 crisis, some of our assumptions of how we should do microfinance were actually challenged in quite interesting ways. And here I would like to invite my colleague Katie on to talk about some of her experiences and what you've seen during the crisis. And I think, hi Katie.
Hello everybody, hi Asmus.
The first thing I would like to ask you is, in microfinance, one of the cornerstones of the traditional microfinance model, how did we manage credit risk? Well, we did it by going to the client physically, to his market stall or whatever site of operation was, and do a business analysis. We counted the goods and we checked the notebooks and all of this. And we always considered that's a cornerstone of how we manage credit risk in microfinance. How do you see that changing during the period of the COVID crisis?
Well, throughout this crisis, we have been engaged in many, including finance institutions and banks operating in microfinance sector. And basically, when there were lockdowns introduced absolutely in every country, the question was what to do, how to continue operations. And basically, initially, each and every institution was forced to do something about that, and basically was forced to offer clients loan restructurings in a remote mode. It was difficult, everybody was scared, but in reality, what we saw in the process, it was that every MFI and bank managed to do restructuring pretty effectively through phone, through e-banking, or through email correspondence with the client. So even though in the beginning we and like MFIs were scared of the process because of lack of confidence how everything will go on, and lack of confidence how we can collect clients' financial information over the phone, the process proved to be pretty successful. And what was the good development of this is many MFIs and banks, after the lockdown, continued offering clients even new loans in a remote mode, those who were bold enough.
Great, thank you, Katie. That's very interesting. And the second point I wanted to ask you about is this physical interaction with the client. What we again had as a cornerstone of our operating model traditionally was, we said this relationship, this one-to-one relationship where we meet with the client face-to-face, we talk to him, we build our bonds, etc. That's very important, and the client wants it. And it's part of how we really keep our client. Now, do you see that also changing during the crisis time?
And I would say changing a lot, because what we saw, clients appreciated the fact that they don't need to spend their time in traveling to the bank. And also they appreciated the fact that clients don't need to distract their attention from their business when, for example, loan officers visit them on site of the business. So in the beginning, again, I'm repeating myself, maybe for clients or for us, it was a bit strange to interact over phone, but at the end, clients appreciated it a lot. And I would say that after the lockdown, some clients even demanded to continue relationship with institutions in this mode, because they appreciated that they have more time now to devote to their business instead of going back and forth to the bank or attending loan officer on site of the business.
That's very interesting again. And I think it shows really how the microfinance industry is changing. And for me, it opens up the question, what do we put instead? So if the loan officer to client relationships, this close relationship is changing or maybe even disappearing, we have to think, do we need to put something in place instead, a different kind of relationship? That's actually not the topic of today's webinar, but we have an idea of getting back to it in a future webinar. So I hope we'll see all of you again later for that discussion as well. The last sort of axiom that I wanted to get to was this idea that our clients are very simple. Our clients are not technologically advanced, they don't have mobile phones or they don't have smartphones, and if they do, they don't know how to use them and they're scared of it, etc. This is something that we as microfinance practitioners have repeated a lot to each other over the years. And I would like to ask, what did we learn again during the crisis about this? Is that still the case?
I would say this way. We learned that clients showed a very high level of adaptability to the changes. And what was very interesting in a couple of institutions where we have been engaged, MFIs and banks try to talk with their customers and understand what type of products or services could be delivered to the client through remote channels. And before these interviews started with the clients, basically the assessment of employees was that it doesn't make sense because our clients are not used to remote channels. They are not technologically savvy. They don't know how to use technology. But it was a surprise that in all of these cases, employees were absolutely surprised to find out that majority of their clients, and when I say majority, I mean more than 80% of their clients had already smartphones. And not only they had smartphones, but they even had certain financial applications on the smartphones and were making, for example, some payments, for example, utility payments over the smartphones, or were using some other financial products over the smartphones. Basically, to a certain extent, COVID crisis forced MFIs to look deeper into the customer profile and to understand even better how their customers evolved.
That's very interesting again. Thanks, Katie. It means, again, the clients are moving ahead, and unless we really go to them and ask these questions, they might be moving ahead faster than we think. Which means again that it opens up for us new possibilities in the microfinance area. Let's go back to our participants here. I would like to go back to Menti and ask one more question. So this point that Katie made about the new ways of doing analysis, financial analysis for clients remotely. What have you done in your institution during this crisis period? Which of these tools have you used? Just a second, we just need to get to the right slide. Katie, I think we skipped this one. Let's do this one then. This is a question I actually meant to ask you earlier regarding the competition in your market. Which are the main competitors in your market? We talked about MFIs, we talked about universal banks, fintech companies. Will be very interesting to see which of these you're already experiencing competition from. So the majority of you are definitely saying microfinance institutions. Not surprising. That's most of the ones that are on this call, and of course you would have competition from this. But there's quite a few who see competition from microfinance banks and also from universal banks as well. And 3 participants already said, well, we are seeing the competition from fintech and online lenders. And I think one of the things we would like to achieve with this webinar is a sort of forward-looking understanding that the trend is coming, that this trend of fintech, online lenders, it is coming to your market as well. It might not be here yet, but it's definitely going to come. So thanks a lot. It's interesting to see that it's already here in several of the markets where you operate. Let's go to the next one. Yeah, this is the one I actually meant to do right now. So let's get back to this. During the lockdowns or restrictions that happened during COVID, which of these channels did you use in order to conduct a remote analysis for your clients? So phone seems to be the clear winner here, even email. Okay, so, but that also, I can see that quite a lot of the participants have this experience and have managed to do the analysis via some form of remote channel, predominantly phone, sometimes email, and 2 institutions even answered e-banking or m-banking. E-banking or m-banking is, of course, something you don't jump into right when the crisis hits, because either you have the application there or you don't have it, and you can't build it by tomorrow. And the reason why phone and call centers is so popular is, of course, that it's there, it's available, and we could quickly switch into it. Great. Thank you very much for your participation here. Let's go back to the presentation, and I would invite Katie to come back in order to go deeper into these new trends and see which are the things that actually now makes it possible for us, gives us new possibilities to create additional efficiency in our institutions.
Well, now we're talking about the need to make 30 changes in the approach of microfinance. And the question is, why today the change is possible? Because there are several factors that enable this change and focusing on the efficiency. And one of the most important factors here is access to information. And what is very important is that inside of the institution, microfinance organizations and banks have already gathered a lot of information about the client, specifically a lot of information about the payment behavior of the client through internal credit history of the client. But what is more important also, practically in most of the countries, we already see very comprehensive credit bureaus developing where we can also look up payment behavior of the clients in other financial institutions. And it helps a lot because it gives us quite good information about the client. Moreover, of course, depending on the country, there are more and more databases developing that, for example, give us information about the property in the ownership of the client, about tax payments of the client, about legal proceedings against the client, about mobile payments made by the client or utility payments made by a client. And basically, this is very important information for us because this gives MFIs possibility to form an opinion about the credit worthiness of the customer. And moreover, where I want to continue, it's about accumulation of the experience inside MFIs and banks. And what I mean here is that despite the fact that formalization level of MFIs or microfinance clients have not changed, and I mean here, we don't have financial information of micro clients readily available or written somewhere in a nice form. This has not changed. But what has changed is that we have accumulated a lot of financial information about our customers, which enables microfinance institutions and banks to develop internal market standards and to benchmark information submitted by the client against internal market standard. Basically, this helps us to have to form a very good opinion on the financial position of the customer and helps you to make more informed decision about the customer. Another aspect that I would like to mention is the legal framework. And in many countries, legal system has evolved and legal framework improved in the direction of making loan recovery easier. Of course, country by country, the situation varies. In many countries, legal process is, or legal recovery of the loan is still a long-term process. But in those countries, or everywhere, basically, irrespective to how legal framework looks like, we need to mention and go back again to our experience. Microfinance institutions became more experienced and better equipped in the loan recovery process. You have better structures, you have better tools and instruments, and the approach to loan recovery has also improved compared to what it was in previous years when there was not sufficient experience. Another aspect, again, needs to be mentioned, it's a regulatory framework. And in this direction, there are several noteworthy developments. For example, practically almost in all countries, regulators become more and more involved in microfinance sector because they want to avoid over-indebtedness. And in these regards, we see in many countries interest rate caps introduced, or we see that regulators make mandatory reporting of clients' credit history to credit bureau, or we see that regulators introduce different mandatory ratios for microfinance institutions, for example, payment to income ratio, debt to income ratio. This is one direction, a direction which microfinance institutions do not typically like, but these regulations force you to become more efficient, because with the interest rate caps introduced in many countries, you don't have any other chance but to become more efficient. Another direction of development is that in many countries, again, regulators allow outsourcing of some services, for example, outsourcing of loan recovery processes. And what is more important, especially pandemic fostered this process, regulators started more and more allowing utilization of distance channels and supporting digitalization of lending process and digital disbursement of loans. And this is very important development, because if earlier it was not possible because of regulatory restrictions, now regulators understood that basically to make financing of customers and make access to finance possible for micro clients, they need to allow digitalization of lending services. We have touched this last point to a certain extent. It's a client readiness, and we see that increased competition, appearance of fintech companies, and now crisis and lockdown faced by the clients due to the crisis, increased readiness of the customers to accept changes. And not only increased the readiness, but customers became even eager to see microfinance institutions changing their approach, becoming more efficient in delivering loan products. So what we need to say, these are the factors that are everywhere, to a certain extent, in each and every country visible. But what is more important is that change today is necessary to remain relevant and sustainable on the market. Otherwise, microfinance institutions with old models, with traditional models, are just not efficient enough and are just not profitable enough to hold their position on the market. And the next question comes, okay, if change is necessary, where we need to start. And the first point to look at is the customer segmentation. And it is very important that in each and every institution, you go back to your big customer base and try to divide customers and allocate them into a homogeneous groups, which will allow you to develop a client risk profile and tailor your approach to the risk profile of the customer. So what could be the criteria to look at to divide the customers into these homogeneous groups? We will just give you some examples, but you don't need to stop on these examples. These are just key criteria, but there could be added some additional ones. For example, you should look at the size of the business. Are we talking about micro business, or are we talking about SME business? Are we talking about lower range of micro business or upper range of micro business? Yeah, this is very important. Another factor, it will be a sector. Is it a low risk? For example, agriculture. Is it a medium risk sector, or is it a high risk sector which was heavily affected by the crisis? For example, sector tourism or hotel dependent on international tourism, yeah, or guest house of dependent on international tourism. Another criteria to look at, it's traceability of financial information, and here you need to look at in which cases financial information is not available at all, or in which, for what type of clients typically you have information on sales turnovers because client keeps records, or in which cases for which type of clients you typically have key positions of profit and loss and balance sheet available. And the last criteria that I want to mention, but of course you can add other criteria as well, it's a credit history. Are we talking about new clients, or are we talking about repeated clients for the institution? And if it's a new client, is it a client with a good credit history or bad credit history? If it's a repeated client, is it a repeated client with good credit history with us or bad credit history with your institutions? Yeah. So these are just an example, but why this is important: when you segment your customers, and when you create risk profile of each and every customer, then you can go first and think, what is the methodologies that you should deploy in relation to this or that segment of the customer? Is individual lending or group lending or maybe digital lending the best approach to be deployed, taking into consideration the risk profile? Or what type of credit cycle classical credit cycle with a lot of involvement of loan officer and a lot of human involvement basically, or more simplified approach, or digital credit cycle, or maybe you need to mix different steps from different models of the credit cycle. What type of products? In microfinance, we are used to offering clients mostly installment loans, but as we mentioned, our clients evolved. So is it a time for you to revise the product offering? Can you offer revolving credit? To what type of customers? Can you offer credit limit or some other products? This all depends on the risk profile of the customer, yeah? Delivery channels, again, there are many channels: call center, mobile wallet, internet banking, ATM, different type of terminals, payment terminals. But the question is to what type of customers you should use this sort of delivery channel based on the characteristics and certain preferences of the customer. And last but not least, also pricing, which should be linked to the risk profile of the customer, and which should be linked to the methodology of lending that you deploy against this or that segment of the customer. As after you segment the customers and after you look at methodology, products, credit cycle, delivery channels, the question is, okay, but how to make sure that we improve the efficiency of business processes inside the organization? And here I would like to invite again Asmus to guide you through this topic.
Hello again, everybody. Sorry, I'll get my camera working. There we are. Thanks, Katie. Yeah, let's take a look at the question of business process management. How do we get all of these changes to happen in a smoother way? We see a lot of microfinance institutions where the processes are still fundamentally the same as they were many years ago, and maybe they even got stricter because you built up risk management structures and auditors, etc., and each of them added control point to your existing processes, and some of them are really quite heavy and paper heavy. So what we would do or recommend to do in a situation like this is to apply what we call business process management to the whole credit cycle, from the point of acquisition of the client until the point of disbursement or even monitoring of the client. So there are two aspects to this. The first one is actually a low tech. You don't have to be Google or Facebook or eBay with big data, etc., to do this. It's about analyzing your workflows in detail, drawing up flowcharts, understanding clearly who's responsible for this step in the process, who's responsible for the next step. And by drawing this out, mapping this out visually, you can relatively easily see all the redundant points in the process. Where is it in your process that the same thing gets checked twice by different people? And do you need it to be checked twice? Usually you do not. You might need it to be checked once. That's 4 eyes principle, but usually we don't need 6 eyes principle in microfinance. And often you can actually, for low risk, low value transactions, you can even step away from the 4 eyes principle and go to a 2 eyes principle. Simply by doing this and by critically questioning the paperwork that we collect and store, you can eliminate a lot of these redundancies. You can critically assess what's the number of people that have to be involved, which roles have to be involved in this process. Do we need that many steps in the process? And is this document really necessary for us? That's a refreshing process that is really worth undertaking every 5 or 10 years in the company, and it doesn't really require a technological approach. If you do take a technological approach, then you can do this in addition. So once you have redesigned the workflows and clearly mapped them out and understood, determined what is inside, then you can use that work as a starting point for a digitalization process, using business process management software to digitalize the whole process from end to end. So you get an application in the beginning, and that is digital from the beginning, and then it stays digital throughout your organization with nobody printing out paper files, scanning them back into the system, printing them out again, etc. This requires some investment, of course, and it requires work. It requires outside support. What it does is all of you have a core system, what we call here CBS, core banking system. Whether or not you're a bank, you have a similar type of system that records your basic transactions and your accounting ledger, etc. These type of systems are typically heavy. They're not flexible and modern and business friendly. So it's difficult to make the kind of changes you would like to make. What we do by taking a BPM software, we put it in front as a shell, and the BPM software communicates with your core system, and then the loan officers and the other staff, they don't talk to the core system anymore. They talk straight to the BPM system. And that way you can very flexibly redesign your forms, etc. And you can add to this the DMS, the next block, the document management system, that makes sure that you don't have to send scans or paper files or emails around, but all the documents that are entered into the CBS or into the business process system or created during the system are automatically stored according to credit files and client files in a useful way. And of course, you can add to this other supporting tools, be it right in the beginning. You can build a landing page or an app or some other form of bringing in the application digital from the beginning that will put it straight into the business process system. Or be it at the end, and we'll get back to that later, the tools for actually dispersing the loans also without going through a labor-intensive process. And then somewhere in the middle, you can additionally build in things like a new underwriting setup or scoring mechanisms, rating mechanisms, which Katie will talk about in a minute when we go deeper into this decision-making and analysis stage. So that's a very general overview of what we mean by business process management. Now let's take the next step and see what can we do. What can the credit cycle look like when we digitalize it? The first stage is acquisition. Well, traditionally you did it with a loan officer running around in the market, but we can also do it with a heavy component of marketing, social media advertising. We might use a call center, a dedicated sales team that organizes this instead. Application. How do we take an application? It used to be the client coming to the branch, signing a piece of paper, but we can also accept it, as I said, through an app, through other kinds of digital channels, a landing page, or through the call center. Then the next step in the cycle is the analysis. Who does the analysis? Again, traditionally, the loan officer did it. But we can also have the underwriting department did it, a centralized underwriting department that sits all day and creates these applications based on the documentation submitted by the client. If we need more documentation from the client, we might get the call center in to call the client, contact the client, and collect this additional information. Then we have the stage of decision making. Traditionally, it was maybe the branch manager, the senior loan officer in the branch. They all got together in one room together with the loan officer and had a discussion. But we can also do it in the underwriting department again. And we can use tools like scoring to either fully automate, in some cases, the decision making, or simply to streamline and make the decision simpler, faster, and easier for the underwriting or whoever has to make the decision. Then we have the stage of formalization and disbursement. Again, we used to have a back officer sitting in the branch who printed out the contract, and we had it signed by the branch manager. We put a stamp on it. The client had to come and visit. But we can also have the contract directly prepared in the BPM system, for example, automatically pulling the data of regarding the client, regarding the approved loan, etc., and spitting out the contract ready to sign. These things are possible, and they're much easier to do in a BPM software than they ever were in the core system. And disbursement, we, as I mentioned, also have tools for disbursement digitally, and we'll get back to those in a minute. Then we have the stage of monitoring. Again, traditionally, we had the loan officer visit after a month and say, what did you do with the money that we lent you? It can also be done by the call center, and in most cases, not with a very big increase in credit risk by doing this. The last stage is repayment. Here we might have things like internet banking, mobile wallets, or pay boxes, the machines that are standing in most countries somewhere around in the street where you can make mobile phone payments or other types of payments. There's no reason why we can't use those to make loan repayments as well. And clients typically appreciate not having to take the trek to the bank, to the MFI in order to make the repayment. And of course, we don't need to digitalize all of them at the same time. We can have different ambitions for different stages of the process. We can digitalize some of them and then get back to some of the others. But the potential, what we're showing here, is for a fully digital process. So the idea is, yes, you have competition from the fintech companies. You don't have to be a fintech company, but you can pick the stages that you think are really important for you to do right now, and that prepares you in a much stronger way for this competition. What are the outcomes of this? You can expand your market coverage. You can reach new target groups. For example, because you can lend in regions where you don't have a physical presence anymore. You can lend to target groups that might not have been profitable for you before because of the administrative cost and the small loan sizes, or because they were more demanding and said, I don't want to spend time on coming to your branch. If you give me a digital channel, then I might be your client. It definitely drives up staff efficiency, and it really changes the loan officer relationship. As you see here in this overview, there is no loan officer. He's disappeared, or she's disappeared from this. Mixed models are also possible, and we can think about developing mixed models. Maybe this cycle works for some types of clients, and for others you will prefer a more traditional model. It does change the need for highly qualified staff, reducing it in the sense that most of the work can get done either automated or by not very high qualified staff, not staff who have the very broad skill set that a traditional loan officer has. You still need high qualified staff, but you need maybe a smaller number of very high qualified staff that can really set up, organize, and design these systems. It's a standardized approach, and because it's standardized, it's very scalable. So once you have it put in place with all the tools correctly defined, then it's very easy to scale it up and to increase your size very fast. And that's actually what the fintech companies do. You might see, they're very small. I don't have to worry about them. But you do, because they spend all the time defining their processes in a very streamlined way, and then they can scale up very fast. What do we need in order to do this? Well, we do need an initial investment, for example, in the app, in the business process management software, etc. To do it well, especially the scoring part, you need high quality databases internally or maybe externally from, as Katie mentioned, from which you will pull additional data that's supporting the decision making. It requires new competencies, so you might have to either hire a new kind of people, or you might have to retrain some of your existing staff. It also mentally requires a paradigm shift. It requires a mental change, a different way of thinking about your relationship with the client and the way in which you do your business. And that's going to be difficult for some people. So you should expect, if you go for this change, you will have a certain staff turnover, especially in the early stages of this project. Not everyone will be able to make this mental shift. So that's a digital credit cycle. Now, Katie, if you want to come back on, then we can dive even deeper into this question of how we can organize the decision making and the analysis process?
Well, this is probably the major questions that most MFIs and banks have. But it's more easier for institutions to accept that application could be received through digital channels. But typically the question is how we proceed afterwards, how we make sure that we conduct sound financial analysis of the client and we assess payment capacity of the customer appropriately. And here we need to look at what are the sources of information that we can use for the assessment of financial situation of the customer. And first, I need to mention it's a self-declaration of the client, which could to the institution through remote channels. What does it mean? What is and is basically when client informs us, reports to MFIs what is the sales turnover or other indicators or information that you want to know to assess payment capacity of the customer. So why this self-declaration submitted through remote channel is different to information that loan officer gathers on the spot of the business. If we will go deeper and scrutinize a bit, basically we will see that there is no difference, because even when loan officer goes on site of the business, he relies on the words of, as we already mentioned, micro businesses do not have official financial statements or even do not keep records of key financial indicators of their business. So there is no major difference. It's just paradigm shift that Asmus mentioned. Another source of information that could be used, it's public and commercial databases. I have already talked about it. Depending on country, there is already either about the turnover of the business or tax payments or utility payments that talk a lot about the payment capacity, or properties in the ownership that talk about the profile of the customer to a certain extent. Most important source that I still want to emphasize, and I will continue emphasizing throughout the presentation, it's internal market standards. And why I'm emphasizing on that is that you all MFIs, all banks already have a very good database internally, but this database needs to be used to create market standards. You can't find better of market standards than your own internal database, but many institutions up to now don't use this database properly. And last, video verification. We are confident when with our own eyes, we see what's going on the spot of the business. And in many cases, to see what's going on, we can just make a video call to a client and ask him to show us around his business. This is also possible and gives more credibility to the information that a client submits through remote channels. I want to touch is, after we collect this information, which tools you can use to make sure the information is processed in a fast and efficient way. And this is either scoring or expert rating. And what is the difference between these? Basically, scoring gives which is used to predict creditworthiness of the customer, while expert rating gives you a rating of the customer, which is used to judge the creditworthiness of the customer. So in first case, I'm using the word to predict creditworthiness, and in another case, I'm using the term judging the creditworthiness of the customer. And why is that? Because scoring is based on the quantitative historical data. So if you have reliable historical database about the client, or more specifically about the demography of the client, about the demography of the business, about the financials of the business, or many other influencing factors, then you can develop statistical model, identify correlation between factors and default, and thus generate score that will predict payment behavior of the customer. But if you don't have this kind of database, what you should do is develop your own expert rating based on qualitative assessment of experienced staff. So ask your experienced loan officers, experienced underwriters, which are influencing factors on the payment behavior of the customer, and based on this, develop rating, which will be used for the judgment. Again, judgment because it's not based on statistical information and statistical analysis, but it's based on experience of your staff. But in both cases, these are very good tools to be used for filtering applications. And let me now show you an example how, for example, these tools could be used and incorporated in your credit cycle. Asmus guided you through fully digital credit cycle, but now let's us look at mixed model. For example, at the stage of filtering application, as I already mentioned, input is from self-declaration of the client, application, and credit bureau. And based on this input, you generate score and expert rating. You can develop certain threshold and say, below this score, we don't finance, we don't consider application. It's a right of a rejection. But if score is then forward, and again, you run information collected through these sources on financial information specifically of the client through internal market standards. If there is no discrepancy, or if there is not a big discrepancy, you can go to a next step and make automatic decision on the disbursement of the loan. But if you see a certain discrepancy, then you can decide either this is automatic rejection, or you channel the application to centralized underwriting department where you already involve human who can go back to a client, specify certain questions, and then decide whether the loan should be approved or rejected. So this is just an example for lower micro segment. Let's now look at the example in upper micro segment. Here, we would recommend splitting customers, whether it's a new customer or repeated customers. And for new customers, when we are talking about upper micro, still we go to a traditional analysis because we want to get to know a client, we want to see a business. But when we are talking about repeated customers whom you already know, then look at the sectors. Is it a high-risk sector or low-risk sector? And why we need to look at the sector? Because in this situation, in this pandemic, we know that impact of the crisis on high-risk sectors, for example, on tourism, was very high. And just based on our historical information, we can't judge what's going on in the business. It's better to go and understand through, again, traditional method, what was the impact of the crisis on a client. In case of low-risk sector, it's easier. We can conduct remote analysis. So ask client to submit financial information or call client and conduct phone interview. After we collect information about the client, then we can run this information through expert rating and use this for deciding what type of collateral based on risk profile of the customer or based on the rating of the customer, what type of collateral we should ask, what type of maturity we should offer, or what should be the pricing of the loan. And later, the case goes either to centralized or decentralized decision-making process. It really depends what's the structure and what's the setup in your organization. It's not really decisive. However, both models have their pros and cons. Another measures that could be taken in order to increase efficiency of serving repeated customers. I will give you a few examples. For example, you can use products such as revolving credit. I have mentioned in the beginning that we are used to issuing installment loans to micro customers, and we refinance customers only after customer makes certain repayment of this loan or repayment of partial repayment of this loan. But what about offering micro customers possibility to reutilize repaid exposure, and we give them unlimited possibility of reutilization of repaid exposures? We know that in many cases, micro clients need bridge short-term liquidity gaps. And in these cases, it's very useful to offer them revolving credit cards. I've seen in many cases microfinance institutions complaining that clients go to fintech or clients go to other microfinance organizations because they wanted small amount, and that organization was faster. So why not to look at what's the problem inside? Is this the problem of the product? Can we be more efficient in this process? Can we offer more flexible products? And this is one of the products that could be offered. And revolving credit could be both with or without payment schedule. So depending on the risk profile of the customer again. And of course, it is approved on the assessment of payment capacity of the customer. Another product that you can offer, and we would like to discuss, it's a credit limit, which is more focused on upper micro client segment. And what this product implies, it implies approval of the maximum possible credit exposure to a client and disbursement of new loans without repeated financial analysis, with validity of the credit limit. So what does it mean? Even if client wants to take, for example, $1,000 loan, but you know that client's payment capacity is $10,000, then you approve $10,000 and tell the client, come and take whenever you need. And come and take either installment loan or credit line or credit card, whatever. I mean, you can offer a range of products to a client to give enough flexibility. And it's very efficient from your perspective, because you save a lot of resources on processing repeated loans, but also good product for clients as well, because they know that if there is a need, the amount is already available, approved, and there is no hassle to go to get the loan. And the last, I mean, the credit limit is again approved based on classical financial analysis, because you need to have a very good assessment on the payment capacity of the client. And the last, let's say, approach that I would like to discuss, it's a proactive approval of repeated loans. Typically, MFIs wait till client comes and submits application. But basically, you can deploy a bit different approach and process centrally from initiation to disbursement, the loan disbursement process. What does it mean? You can look into your database and see who are the clients who have good credit history, who have already fully or partially repaid their exposures, and to whom you would like to extend new exposures. You process all of this centrally, approve amount, for example, equal to previous exposure or slightly more than previous exposure, depending on the credit history of the customer and also historical payment to income ratio. And basically with this, you just avoid all human involvement, because you can do it really centralized underwriting without involving branches and loan officers, and even offering of the loans could go through centralized call center without taking precious time of loan officers on working on repeated customers, while they can focus on the acquisition of new customers in this process. These are just few examples. Of course, there are other examples that you could deploy, but these are the ones that are already tested and to prove to be very, very efficient. Again, Asmus is back, and now I would like to ask him to continue what could be done on the disbursement, formalization and disbursement stage of the credit cycle.
Great. Thank you, Katie. Yes, I promised you a couple of examples, and these are the ones that I want to talk about today. There are, of course, many more potentially, but at least 3 things I wanted to mention. The first one is framework contracts. Framework contract is actually, in its essence, a low-tech tool. What we do is we sign one contract that is a long-term contract with the client, whom we either have as a repeated client or we expect him to be a repeated client. And that's the contract that contains all of the legal stuff, blah, 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 that doesn't actually have the business conditions in. And it contains all of the, it's where you register your collateral under the framework contract. And then when you disperse a loan, you sign a quick 1-pager with the client that shows what are the conditions of the loan you're taking today and refers back to the framework contract, that it is done underneath that framework contract. We've used it in many countries, and I would say in almost all jurisdictions, we've found that it's possible and legal to do this. It's a very common tool in European, American banks, etc. That is how you manage your client relationships, so that you don't have to every time sign a multi-page contract with the client. As a next step, you can then, in a lot of places, you already have the possibility to do electronic signature, which might mean that that 1-pager that we send you when you have to get a loan, you can just log into our app, our internet banking application, use your digital signature in order to approve that you agree to this contract, and then it has exactly the same validity as a paper contract, but without the need for you to come to our branch and physically meet with us. Huge time saver potentially for the client. And the last one is about remote delivery channels for the actual loan. So again, we all were used to having a cashier in the branch, multiple cashiers in the branch, and the client would come to the cashier in order to get their money. Once the loan was disbursed, they would get cash. These days, there are a lot of other opportunities, technically speaking and practically speaking. So one is simply that the client has a payment card or an account in a bank, and you can transfer the money directly to there. There are quite a few countries where by now it's already so common to have a bank account that this is not a restricting factor anymore. And then the client gets the money on the account and can use the card, withdraw it, or make a transfer from there, etc. In some of the countries where it's not very common to have a bank account, other tools are popping up. Mobile wallets are becoming more interesting as a way of usually managing the relatively small amounts that are the case in microfinance. And you can make your utility payments with it. You can transfer money to others. You can pay in shops, and you can usually link it up to some other way of getting cash paid out, be it in an ATM or through somebody else's cash box. Either the wallet provider or through a bank cash box. And in this way, it's just one of the options you can give to the client. If the client is used to working with a certain wallet, then it's a benefit for him that you ask, well, which wallet would you like me to pay out your loan to? You can even pay it, you can team up with a bank or an ATM owner that you send your client a code by SMS or email or some other way, that you can use this code. You can go to the ATM of this institution, you type the code into your ATM, and then it will spit out the money that we have paid you. All of these things are technically possible today and gives a huge amount of flexibility for the client, while at the same time it reduces your own administrative expenses. So that's just a couple of ideas. There are, of course, plenty more. And I think the biggest challenge in all of this discussion is maybe the question, where do we start? How do we pick among all of these interesting possibilities for increasing our efficiency? And here I would, before we summarize it, I would actually like to go back to the Menti one more time and hear from you, which of these areas have you already started to digitalize in your institution? Carmen or Ketty, if we could go back. Yeah, great. Thanks. So we have these different stages that we're showing: the acquisition, the application, the analysis, decision-making, disbursement, monitoring, and repayments. And which of them have you already started to digitalize in this in your institution? Let's just give everyone a moment. I hope you left the Menti page open so it's quick and easy to get to. So it seems like acquisition, application, so the early stages is what is maybe most advanced, and then the middle stages, which is decision making and disbursement, analysis and monitoring maybe a little bit less. Analysis, I think, is for a lot of people the most, it feels like the most difficult ones to start automating. I can definitely understand that. Great, thank you very much. It's very interesting to see where everyone is at the moment. Then let's go back to the presentation. We have one more slide, which is really just a summary of what we've talked about so far. And after that, we will go to our Q&A session. So what are the general topics? The first and biggest one maybe is that increasing efficiency is vital for survival. It's not a nice to have anymore, but it does determine which organizations are still going to be around 5 to 10 years from now. So it's something that everybody needs to work intensively on, and changes are going to happen to the business model. The crisis that we're in at the moment, COVID, the pandemic, it just reinforces that need. It pushes us even harder, but it also creates an enabling environment. We've seen in so many places that regulators are much more open and to allow you to do changes that you might have wanted to do, and the customers are much more open-minded about it as well than they might have been before all of this happened. The next thing I wanted to underline is the idea about business process management, this deep dive analysis of your processes, whether you only do the part that you can do low tech with mapping out the processes and cutting away the redundant parts, simplifying them, or whether you go digital and implement a business process management solution that will really help you to drive towards digitalizing the full credit cycle. These are the tools that I think so many of the clients that we see can benefit from implementing. And then the other tools that we talked about, decision-making support, so using scoring, or if you don't have the data yet for creating scoring mechanisms, then developing rating mechanisms that can help and support, especially the strongest impact you will have on the lower end of micro, where you often can either fully or nearly fully automate the process. And then on the higher end, you can use it as a supporting tool. And then these delivery mechanisms that we talked about, how to actually get the money to the client without the need for going through a cash box anymore. All of these together can make a huge difference. The biggest question is really where to start, how to focus our efforts, which ones to work on today, because we can't work on all of them in parallel. Most institutions cannot. So that's the end of the presentation part of our webinar. The next one is, and I think Carmen will guide us through the Q&A session. So we look forward to your questions.
Yes, and thank you very much, Katie and Asmus, for talking us through this presentation, talking us through all these topics that are really on top of people's minds from what we can see from your reactions as well. And a lot is already going on, and we hope we could share a little more what else is also going on. And it's interesting to see what everyone is up to give you some ideas in times where it is difficult sometimes to look ahead, because we react a lot to what is going on immediately around us. So in terms of questions, so please continue to add your questions in using the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen. You can simply type your question. You get a choice if you want that anonymous or if you would like to have your name added. We will of course not mention your name, but I think it is visible to others who it is. So decide for yourself which one is important. So Katie and Asmus, thank you very much. And I come to our first question, which goes around the efficiency. To what extent does a focus on increasing efficiency lead potentially towards a worse quality portfolio? How do you see that connection happening or not happening? What's your experience?
So I can maybe start, and then Katie, you can add your points of view as well. I would think that yes, there is a tendency. So if we look at the approaches of the fintech companies who go very strongly in this direction, they usually have a bit of a lighter touch analysis for these very small loans, and they accept a little bit of a higher level of arrears. You coming from more traditional microfinance companies, you might have a different risk appetite. You don't want to accept quite such a high level of arrears as they are willing to. That can be managed because when you plan this, you decide how deep do you want to go. For example, if we talk about using a rating system and market standards, you can, and I've worked with microfinance institutions who do this, who say, for the lower end, up to $1,000, up to $2,000, or up to $5,000, depends on the market, I will fully automate this process. I don't want to have a loan officer who goes and does a detailed analysis. I understand losses will be a little bit higher, but the process will be faster. And above that level, I will take some of the mixed approaches that Katie talked about in her presentation and blend in some of the new approaches with some of the traditional approaches to manage credit quality. And of course, you decide in your implementation, where do you want to put this level? But I think there is a certain level where everyone would say, this loan does not make sense for me to disperse if it's too small for me to disperse with the old-fashioned process. So if I want to work with that level of clients, then I have to take one of the new approaches. So that's at least one thought about it. And Katie, maybe you want to add something?
Just to add on that, it very much also depends what type of control mechanism you implement throughout the lending cycle. When we are talking about automation, Asmus mentioned, you already mentioned it, and we are not talking about you don't conduct financial analysis at all. Yeah, you are just using different channels to collect information and different tools to process information. So this is key. And another factor is, okay, how you conduct controls, and when you do that, do you want to do it before the disbursement or after disbursement? Yeah, do a random check. If there is some suspicion, you can even say, I want to call a client and clarify some questions. Or ex post, after the disbursement, you can always select a client and conduct ex post controls. And based on controls, I mean, you may ask, okay, what it changes after I do it after the disbursement? It changes the models that you use. you can fine tune and make your model better and better, stronger and stronger. Yeah. So it doesn't mean that you close eyes on it risks, but you just look at it from a different perspective and you use different controls in the process.
Thank you. We have quite a number of questions that have come up now, and they're mainly turning around the digitalization. I'll just take them in order as they come up, but just they are very connected. So first one is, can we use CBS, core banking system, LOS system without BPM system?
Sorry, what is meant by the LOS system?
Probably loan origination system.
Potentially you can use any combination you want to. But I think the one system that really drives the change and helps you to create all of the changes is the BPM system, because that's the one that goes beyond the origination and allows you to pull it all the way through the credit process and stay digital without the process. So if you're thinking about which of these stages you should do first when you're starting a digitalization process, I would probably start with the BPM system, and then you can add additional plug-in modules to that afterwards.
So, I mean, just to add on that, you need one platform that unifies everything else that you have in the organization, because we have seen in many institutions when there are different platforms, CBS used, loan origination system used, something else used, but they are not unified in one platform, and then the process is not as efficient and as effective as we would like typically to have it. So yes, we still think you need BPM.
Thank you. And let's go to the next question. Is how long of a period does digital transformation need to be implemented in an MFI? There's not an easy one.
I would say, one answer would be it never ends, because we start going digital now, and then we will actually be working on digital projects forever. That's the future. But I realize that's maybe not a helpful answer for the person who's asking the question. I think if we take an example like the business process management system, a basic implementation for an MFI not with a lot of bells and whistles and extra modules, etc., but really just a basic sort of conveyor belt implementation, including a process analysis and streamlining your processes, because that's necessary to get it to work. You could do in a time frame between 6 and 12 months.
Thank you. Then going on to the next question is how to improve efficiency when the company's OPEX budget is limited and we cannot do digitalization. Reduce other admin costs and redistribute to digital, or work on revenues?
Basically, I would say the answer is both. You need to work on cost cutting, and you also need to work on revenues. It's not only one-sided answer. But what I can share based on our experience is that there is plenty of room for cost cutting in traditional microfinance model, because you as an institutions are not used to scrutinize your cost base. And in many of our engagements, for example, 10% cost cutting is very easy to be achieved. A bit more requires a bit more detailed analysis, structural changes, but it's possible. But again, answer is both. You need to work both on costs and on revenues as well.
If I would add to that, then as a sort of practical piece of advice, thinking through some of the tools that we discussed today, look for where are the low-hanging fruits. A lot of the things we talked about today, you can actually implement and drive up your efficiency level without big investments. We talk about framework contracts. Framework contracts doesn't require digitalization. It's a good first step before digitalizing, but they have a lot of value in and of themselves, and it doesn't require real investment. Similarly, some of the tools that Ketty mentioned, like creating a credit limit for your clients, is something that makes the credit process a lot faster. You simply save on the number of analysis. If a client comes every 6 months, then you might only do half the number of financial analysis that you did before. And it doesn't, in the basic version of it, it doesn't really require significant IT investment. Similarly, we talked about business process management as having 2 steps. One being the deep dive revision and mapping of your processes and changing your operating processes. And the second one being reflecting that in a digital system. The second part requires investment. The first one doesn't really require a lot of investment. So I think a lot could actually be achieved sort of, if you would say, preparing yourself for the digitalization stage without doing the big investments.
Mm. Yeah, and I'm just looking at a question. We've had a question come up in the chat, which I think might be related to what you have here, that MFIs are in the market because they offer access to clients that do not have access in banking system. Doesn't digitalization require more formalization from the clients, eliminate the advantage that MFIs have in front of the other players in the market?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch the question.
Okay, I'll just read it again. It's in the chat if you can't see it. MFIs are in the market because they offer access to clients that do not have access to a banking system. Would the digitalization, which requires more formalization from the clients, not eliminate the advantage that MFIs actually have in front of other players in the market?
I mean, just to start with the fact, when we are talking about digitalization, we don't talk about shifting your focus to customers who are more formal. We are talking about how you collect information through digital channels, same information that you are collecting in a traditional model when you are visiting the client. We purposefully don't mention that you should ask client official financial statements or something like that. We ask self-declaration of the client. So ask client financial information and ask client to submit this financial information through digital channels. And again, I'm repeating myself, what's the difference between when loan officer goes and asks questions and receives answers through face-to-face communication, and when these questions are given to a client in a written form through, for example, application form, which is filled in by the client. Again, I need to emphasize, we are not talking about shifting focus to a more formal clients, but the ways of collecting information through digital channels.
I think we should see the digitalization as being a supporting tool that helps us to do what we do better and faster. Of course, if you want to change your business model and go to a different set of clients, that's a whole different discussion. That's not what we're talking about today. But fundamentally, we're assuming in our talk today that you want to continue servicing your target group. Maybe you can even expand your target group through digitalization. As I mentioned before, well, digitalization can be both outside, so in your relation with the client, but it can also be inside your organization, just helping you to do your processes cleaner and faster than you did them before. And there, I think, is a trade-off. When you talk about the low-end clients, the ones who would take $100 loans or $200 loans, you're not going to earn very much interest over the lifetime of that loan. So if you have the $20 interest that you will earn on that loan, you can't afford to spend $15 on administrative expenses in managing that client relationship. But if you have the process digitalized, you can do it, you can do the process cheaper for yourself, which actually might allow you to service more clients in the lower segment of the market. At least that's how I see it, as a technology, as an enabling factor, more than something that pushes you away from your core clients.
Then moving on to a slightly different question, is actually mostly we're talking about the digital concept, digital processes or pre-approval. But what should be the most effective risk mechanism to ensure we go through the right decision with better loan quality? So about the risk mechanism rather than the process at the point.
Well, Katie, you talked quite a bit about the risk mechanisms and the loan approval and how that's related to quality today. What are the sort of key things you would pull out of there?
I mean, what is very, very important right now, again, digitalization should not be associated with overlooking the risks. Yeah, it's, again, you mentioned it's a tool to make the process more effective, but we still need to look at the risk profile of the customer when we make a decision, whether we want to work with this customer or not. We should look at where the client operates. We should look what is the impact of the COVID on this sector. And if the COVID impact is very high, can we run this case through digital automatic way? We mentioned mixed model, or do we want to go and see and conduct classical financial analysis for this type of customer? Yeah. So again, we are talking about what is the risk profile where we can be more bold in use in digital channels and digital credit cycle, and what is the risk profile of the customers where we need to use is a mixed model, or we should stay with the classical model of lending.
Thank you. And then we have a question of what is your view if e-signature is not yet recognized by authority or the regulator? Have you come across this case before, and how could that be handled?
Absolutely. I think e-signatures are, or digital signatures are a relatively new tool in most markets. So we've all gone through that and lived most of our lives without having digital signatures. So if it's not recognized in your country, then you probably cannot implement it. I could think of some situations where it might be possible to do it even if it's not recognized by a third party. But in most cases, to really get the benefit out of it, it might also be that you need a national solution in place that really is common and is implemented in the country and is supported by the regulator, by the courts, etc. Because otherwise you create more hassle for yourself by implementing a sort of half solution. But I would not get stuck on the e-signature. The e-signature is cool, and there are a lot of other cool things one can do, and different markets have some of them. Yeah, for example, in some countries you can do your client identification remotely. Even a bank can do it remotely with a video identification. The client takes his passport and takes a selfie, and that's how you can do it. And it's super cool, and it's a great driver of efficiency in those countries where it's possible. The others where it's not yet possible, I think we'll just have to focus their efforts on some of the other things to implement. And as we saw today, it's quite a catalog of different things one can focus the efforts on until the other things become available.
Thank you. And then we move on to a bit of a staff question. To move on in digitalization using existing staff or hiring of new tech-savvy resource, which one's advisable? If you could share your experience.
It very much depends on what type of staff are we talking about. Are we talking about loan officers, or are we talking about IT staff who needs to drive the process of digitalization? And you need to assess what is your capacity in IT. Do you have people who can drive the process, or you need to enhance the capacity? But when we are talking about loan officers, Basically, I strongly believe that you can work with existing staff, but you need to work a lot on paradigm shift, because we have seen in many institutions when loan officers and branch managers, generally branch staff, is absolutely against of digitalization, with the argument that our portfolio quality will deteriorate. As they don't believe that they can keep, for example, loyalty of the customer, or they can keep portfolio quality. But I can assure you that in organizations where we were involved in automation and digitalization of the processes, we proved to loan officers that portfolio quality of loans processed through digital channels is not worse than portfolio quality processed traditional channel. But it requires a lot of work with the loan officers. One argument keeping your staff is that these are the people who have a very good accumulated experience about the clients, and these are the staff that could be easily used as an underwriters, for example, when they receive information already collected from digital channels. These people, looking at this information, can judge whether information is relevant to the sector, to the risk profile of the client or not.
Yeah, I would add, I would say maybe to a very simple answer, both. So for me, the most difficult thing is this connection to create between, you need your people who have business and risk experience and understand their markets, etc. And you need super strong technical minds who can create the technical tools. And then you need to be able to get them to talk together. And that's maybe as a manager, your biggest challenge. Sometimes you do it by having people in between that you call analysts or something, that work essentially as translators between the business side and the IT side. But of course, it can also be done by teaching your existing business people a bit more about IT and teaching the IT people a little bit more about business. I think actually all of these are necessary. I would say probably nobody can do all of this without hiring new staff with new qualifications, because it's unlikely that you suddenly, after 10 or 20 years of not doing this sophisticated digital stuff, that you would actually realize that you have the whole skill sets available in the institution. So probably some of it has to come from the market, but the important part is to get those different sides to talk to each other, including the existing staff.
And then to the next question is, for a microfinance bank with around 1 million clients, what would be the best strategy to shift to digital lending while availability of recorded data of customer behavior is very limited?
We have many organizations. You are not alone. Let me start with that. Mostly in microfinance institutions, we see very big database. It's not that information is not available, but it's not digitized. And that's why MFI struggle to deploy scoring. But as we discussed, it's not necessary that you right away go to scoring. You can develop an internal rating system. But when we are talking about rating, it's one of the two. But let's again go through a credit cycle. Application submission. You don't need database to digitize this step. Information collection, you don't need database to digitize this step. When you need a database is processing this information to generate certain score. And yes, you can do, but you can deploy rating and you can develop market standards. I understand that even for market standards, it's good to have data available electronically, but even if it's not available, files are available, and you just need to gather experienced people, tell them what type of information needs to be gathered to create market standards. So it is limiting factor, but it's not stopping factor.
And then I think one has to look at it also as a relatively long process, where you are starting now, and you start with the, as Katie say, the expert assessments and the expert ratings from your experienced credit risk people. And then one of the things that they have to decide, so they will build their rating system that you will use for the next year or two, but they also have to make sure what are the indicators that we want to collect and store in the database systematically going forward, because it takes time. You might need 1 year, you might need 2 years to build up that database before there's enough quality data in there to build a proper scoring system. So the decisions you make today about what data we collect and then start collecting it systematically in the system is something that then determines your future for the next 2 years.
Thank you. I'd like to add that we've arrived at what officially is the ending time of today's webinar, and we understand some of you have to go. Know that you will record the you will receive the recording. This session is also on the recording, and I would propose to our presenters, if you agree, that we go a little further. We've got a few more questions to get through, because there is a need for answers here, if that's okay. So hopefully you can stay with us while we go through this. And one very specific one, in what way could we digitalize the credit analysis? What do you mean? Like, what is that? In a few more specific terms.
Mm-hmm. So we are talking here about collecting financial information through digital channels and processing financial information, for example, through running it against and comparing it to market standards, like limiting people involvement in the process of collecting and in the process of processing. You can also decide whether you want to make automated decision based on collected information. So this is what we mean when we talk about digitalization.
Okay, thank you. And the next one would be, what will you recommend whether an MFI should have in-house digitalization team, or is it better to have an outsourced service to drive digitalization in process and systems?
I think that's a great, very practical question, and I see actually in the Q&A section there are several people asking more or less the same question there. I would again say probably both, because I've had clients, for example, that were not yet strong enough in their internal IT and process management understanding and people, and then they contracted an outside IT company to come in and do a business process management system for them. And they signed a big contract, $1 million, and the company took the $1 million and said, well, here's your system. And 3 years later, the system is sitting there on the shelf, and it's like a Rolls Royce, but operating in the first gear, because the institution was not ready to take advantage of the features there. And the other aspect is you have to know what to demand from this outsourced company. So you have to have this understanding of your business process and say, well, what I want exactly this step, and I want it for exactly this person, and then it has to go exactly to over here. And if you're not ready to tell them that, then then you will get a standard solution, off-the-shelf solution, which doesn't fit exactly the needs that you have in your institution. So I think you need to do both. You need to strengthen your own capacities so you can really talk eye to eye with the outsourced companies that you work with. Otherwise, they will. Well, I wouldn't say they will take advantage of you. There are plenty of decent people out there, but that's at least a risk that you don't get the benefit out of the outsourcing. On the other hand, can you do it all in-house? It also depends who you are. Yeah, somebody asked a question in the Q&A. Well, we're an institution with 1 million clients. So if you are a very big institution, you can of course afford to have a big team and to invest in strong people that can develop new systems. For most of the MFIs, I would say, don't develop all your own solutions, because there are very good solutions that are already developed out there. And if you start developing it yourself, chances are that it will take longer than you think, and you will not get quite the quality you think, and there will be bugs that other people have spent the last 5 or 10 years fixing already. So to take advantage of this, I would definitely, for most of the solutions and most of the MFIs, go with outsourced solutions that are supported by a strong team inside who know what to demand from these companies.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Asmus. And then during a digitalization or implementation of new systems, how to implement the change management? If you can point to a few successful strategies you've seen.
Let's start with the unsuccessful ones. I think it's a big risk to underestimate the change and to not communicate clearly and directly with your employees, because this is going to be a painful process for some employees. Some employees will lose their jobs, either because you will dismiss them in the process or because they decide for themselves, this new mindset, this new way of working, I can't do it, I don't want to do it. So there will be painful things happening along the way. And I think it's important to outline your strategy clearly and honestly with your employees when you start this and say, this is the direction we want to go. And we want to take you along the way, but it requires for some of you to change, to learn, etc. And outline, explain to them what are your expectations of them in this process, because in that way you give them also the chance to come along, to follow along with your company and to become convinced of this. And if you don't clearly spell out that vision from the beginning, you risk simply alienating more people than you otherwise would, and losing more people than you otherwise would. So that's in relation to the employees. In relation to the customers, I think it's important to take not only an institution view of it, not only the view, how can I make this process more efficient for me, but also take the client view. How can I use this to make the process better for you? I think this is a super interesting topic, and I can already now hint that there's a webinar coming in the future that's called Banking for Happiness, where we're going to talk more about this. Yeah, some of these digital tools and the way they get implemented are a pain in the neck for the customer, but it does increase efficiency on the company side. So if you want to keep your customers, part of this change management is really thinking through the process and organizing it in a way that it actually benefits your customers when you're implementing it, and not only benefits the organization.
Thank you. And then we go to, how can we manage fraud risk when we reduce face-to-face contact with the customer?
I think we more or less discussed this, and coming back to controls that you implement in the process. And even when we have face-to-face contact with the customer, fraud risk is still there. It's very important, like we always tell and recommend microfinance institutions to have a good internal control teams who would conduct ex post controls over the loans. But when we are talking again, what to do, what we have to do, and why fraud risk increases when we are talking about digital channels, do we think that client will lie more when they are submitting information through digital channels? From where this fear is coming? This is the first thing that we need to look at, because even if we think that client is submitting incorrect information, we already talked that you need to compare this information to internal market standards. If you have good market standards, then you will detect whether client is submitting correct information or not. This is one thing. Another thing is you can always decide what are the cases, what are the risk indicators that prompt pre-disbursement or post-disbursement random check of specific clients. If this is done also well, if risk indicators are developed well enough, then fraud risk and the possibility of detecting potential frauds increases, and then again strengthening your model. So this all depends on controls that you implement in the process.
If I may add to that, also, one should definitely also look at the other side of it. How do we reduce fraud risk by reducing face-to-face contact with the customers? Because some of the biggest fraud cases that we've seen in microfinance institutions are not because of one individual client lying to the institution. That happens all the time, actually, and we know that that's a risk, and we're always trying to guard ourselves against it. But through employees systematically conspiring with clients to defraud the institution. And one of the things that happens there is when the client is alone in the field with the customer, money changes hands and promises are made. And in this new digital setup, that there is often no space for that, because there isn't that physical connection, and the client might not know who it is who actually makes a decision on her loan application. So a lot of this fraud risk is actually potentially reduced quite significant with the new setup.
Thank you. And we go to what appears so far be our last question, and it's also coming up for the 2-hour mark. So based on your observation, could you please share about one of the most effective MFIs currently? What's the most effective digital lending process they have implemented that you have seen? If there is such an example.
Well, I don't think I would pull out any specific institution and put it in front of you, but maybe again to mention some of the most the sort of cutting edge developments that are what people are trying, the coolest things people are trying to do at the moment. So I would mention the digital identification, as we mentioned already, the fact that you can actually onboard a client and have a proper KYC process, know your client, without having a physical meeting. And that is becoming possible in some jurisdictions now. And we've seen banks and microfinance companies doing it. And I think that's really cool because it removes a big bottleneck. The second thing that I think is cutting edge right now is the integration or working closer together with payment services providers, so that microfinance and payment service providers together, either by cooperating or by merging or by creating your own payment service provider, etc. Together, they're actually able to do everything that a bank could. So it suddenly catapults potentially microfinance into a different position where we are no longer the underdogs who that the banks have to be are taking market share from, but that you're really able to compete against banks in a new way and offering a fuller range of products. And the third one is about scoring. And here I would say we've seen plenty of companies who are successfully using scoring in consumer lending, where there's a salary statement and a relatively very, very simple analysis. We haven't yet seen any company who has fully cracked the nut of understanding how to do statistically based scoring for microfinance. There's a lot of people that are working on it, and I'm sure that tomorrow will bring a lot of new insights in this. But these are some of the cutting edge things that I think people are working on that are the most exciting in the industry, and that I think in a couple of years we'll be seeing how they really work out to create new solutions for clients.
Lovely. Thank you very much. That was our last question for today. So at this point, I'd like to say thank you for all these questions. Thank you, Asmus and Katie, for staying longer and making sure we go through all of them. Thank you for everyone who's still here for staying this long. There's quite a lot of you that have stayed with us to the end. And thank you to Triple Jump Advisory Services, who make all of this possible for us to exchange ideas and talk about these things and bring these things to you. So thank you all round. The one small request I've made at the beginning: when you close this webinar, you'll see a window come up asking you for a survey. It is really important for us, in order for us to bring us the topics you're interested in. It is really helpful when you let us know what you're interested in. And Asmus has mentioned it as well. We have scheduled the next webinar, Banking on Happiness, around the topic he's mentioned, around clients and the relationship we build with them, and we build it differently now, and it should be focused on that relationship. So that's coming up. Look out for your invitations for that one. We really look forward to seeing you there again. And so far for me remains to wish you a wonderful day. Stay well and take care.
Bye, everyone. Have a nice day.
Have a good day. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.